Welcome, everybody, to our new series, Conversations That Matter. I'm really excited to have our SUNY Empire Service Corps student, Himal Sritha, who is focusing on civic engagement in our Office of Community and Civic Engagement. He will be leading the discussion today with no other than Stephanie King, who is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for the All in Campus Democracy Challenge. She previously held roles of Director for Civic Engagement and Knowledge Community Initiatives at NASPA, where she directed the NASPA LEAD initiative and co-managed and co-created the Voter Friendly Campus program. Stephanie King has worked in higher education since 2009 in the areas of student activities, orientation, resident life, and civic learning and democratic engagement. She earned her master's in psychology at Chatham University and her bachelor's of science in biology at Walsh University. She has contributed to a few publications, including Effective Strategies for Supporting Student Civic Engagement, Higher Education Role in Enhancing a Thriving Democracy, Learning and Democratic Engagement Theory of Change. Also, Power to the Polls and Leaning into Politics, Higher Education and Democracy We Need Now. So King has also served as an election clerk for the town of Dedham in Massachusetts. So it's an honor to have her here today and for our student to interview her and ask her questions to learn more about civic engagement and her work across the board. So without further ado, I hand it over to Himal.
Hello, my name is Himal Shrestha. I'm a senior at Farmingdale State College. I'm majoring in computer programming and information systems. I'm involved with the SUNY Empire Corps Service as a civic engagement corps member in the Office of Community and Civic Engagement. So, I'm pretty passionate about using technology to drive some meaningful change. And in addition to that, of my technical pursuits, I want to be committed to the civic engagement. I believe that harnessing like digital solutions to expand critical resources to underserved communities. So, today I'll be interviewing Stephanie King, Director, Strategic Initiatives in All in Democracy. So for our conversation today, in the Matter series, a project that I'm working on. So if I can continue, so hi Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm really excited to learn about your experiences, especially if someone who has just started out on my own journey in civic engagement through Farmingdale State College's office of OCCE. So I did a little bit of research about your background. So I saw that you've worked across so many different areas in higher education, from student activities to residence life, and leading many national initiatives in all in. So it's very inspiring to see how your career has connected to so many aspects of student life, especially to our, we have our civic engagement. So I'm looking forward to hearing your insights, especially around how to make this work maybe more accessible to students like me and my peers. I have a few questions prepared, but I'd love to get a feel for more like a conversation. So if there's anything you want to expand on or stories you'd like to share, please feel free. So should we jump in?
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me be part of your conversation today. And I look forward to exploring the areas of civic engagement that you want to get to know more about and how I or others can be a support to you and your peers as you move forward in this area.
Awesome. That's amazing. So let's start with the questions. So one of the questions I had is, as a Farmingdale SUNY Empire Corps fellow member in the civic engagement, I'm kind of curious. I would like to know what originally sparked like your passion for democracy and public service. So where did it all begin?
I feel like that's a great question to ask. And I feel like there's multiple answers I could possibly give here. But I think I'll start with where you are in the college experience. So I went to school out of state. I'm from Pennsylvania and went to school in Ohio. I'm a first gen college student, excuse me. And so navigating the process was new to myself and my family as we figured out all the things from financial aid to what does it mean to live on campus versus having a job and becoming a commuter student and managing midterms and roommates and all the things that go with that, right? But I was definitely a curious student, much like I still am today. And that led me to get involved in opportunities similar to what you're doing now. If I was taking part in community service opportunities that were offered through the institution, I was taking part in student government when the chance arose. I also was an orientation leader and really espoused me involved in things like the science club, like really random kind of opportunities that allowed me to explore multiple options there. And as time progressed, I went through my undergraduate experience, continuing to be a heavily involved student, just trying to figure out what might be my best niche. And then I had a really great mentor who encouraged me to understand that you can work at a college or university, not as a faculty member, but in a co curricular capacity to continue to explore my areas of interest. And in doing so, that led me to a full time role in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at an institution known as Chatham University. And at that moment in time, it was 2012 to date myself a little bit. And the Crucible Moment report came out from the Department of Education then and AAC&U. And it really challenged administrators to think about what does it mean to create a civic minded campus. And at that point in time, and still today, I'd consider myself a yes person. And when the report came out, my vice president at the time was like, we're going to do something. And who wants to be the point person? And I was young and eager and excited. And I said, me. Like, I think I can do this. Like, I think I can figure it out. And I had great partners in the Pennsylvania Center for Women in Politics, which helped me to connect not only the practical application of civics, so things like getting to understand the voting process in Pennsylvania or getting to understand how to write my representatives, but to also think about things of how do you run for government offices or how do you propose litigation in any particular direction with the support of other experts, right? Like, how do you find ways to connect that? And then as my interest grew, it really started more around like reciprocal relationships. And so not only do we talk about the voting experience, but how do we connect that to the broader community? Because voting is one transactional experience in some entities, but you really need to think about what is the community ecosystem and how can you provide leverages for folks that are like, I just have time to volunteer for 1 hour, or I really care about food insecurity, and so I'm going to donate my dollars here, or I really want to talk about the policy piece of it and how do we write legislation that enables us to think about social programs. Like, they're all connected in a different way. And so
Mhm.
having those micro experiences allowed me to really think about where are the leverage that we can see change in community and how can we, regardless of our role, play a part in moving one of those levers to hopefully meet some issues that we care about and optimistically kind of resolve them.
Wow. That's really good. Something that you said in the beginning was, starting as a first generation college
Mhm.
student, I can relate to that a lot as I am as well. And, something that you said about opportunities appearing as you go through the, journey. I think that's what I'm experiencing right now. So like the speaker series, having a chance to talk to someone who was way farther into the field, and that's amazing. Thank you so much. So one of the next questions I have is, as I read, how did your career path take you from studying psychology and biology, lead you to taking national initiatives and like all in? Because those seemingly to me right now, and other peers that I have might seem unrelated, but how did you like break into there?
Yeah, great questions. I think many probably from your collegiate experience would talk a lot about the transferable skills, right? As I was working on my undergraduate degrees, I should say I was a chemistry major until like the last semester of college. And then it was like, you
Well,
have to take inorganic chem. And I was like, I am done. Like, I am so mentally tapped out. I don't think I can manage it. And I was doing some, I think, fun internships and experiential learning activities where I worked at Omnova Solutions, which was then a polymer plant, which was really fun. I actually made the adhesive that makes tape or helps to stick like images to billboards, which is
wow.
nothing like what I do today, but really challenged me academically as I thought that was the path I was supposed to be on in some particular direction. But again, I had those micro experiences of continuing to say yes to things. So I got to experience new opportunities, kind of dabble in different learning environments. So taking internships, having service learning courses, having moments of just reflection with peers and mentors that allowed me to kind of explore what those options might be. To then think about the doors don't have to be so close-minded, right? Like, we can open up the door frame so you can have a bigger picture of the world, but also thinking of what are employers looking for? It's not
Mm,
always so ingrained. If you want to go into tech, of course, you need some coding skills to be able to work in the computer sciences, or if you're working in data analytics, of course, you need to understand statistics in a variety of ways. But it's also about like, where do you learn critical thinking? Where do you learn good communication skills? Where do
yeah.
you learn to be a collaborator and a good teammate and not just top down in a particular direction? So doing things like what you're doing now within the service corps, you're picking up those soft skills that make you more marketable in a field, regardless of what the entity might be. And in areas like civics and community, that's some of the top things that I do. I have to talk to people from diverse backgrounds. I have to meet a resolution, even if I don't agree fully with it, right? So we have to have dialogue across difference. I need to
Mhm.
understand how systems work and how to manage and change those systems. And then also how to think about what is the long-term game. So having critical thinking skills that enable me to see the big picture instead of always being granular within the moment in time. So I
Wow.
would argue that that's how I got to where I am. And while I value my degrees, I think they are very precious pieces of paper. There also was a lot of those experiences that got me to where I am today, even though my degree doesn't necessarily match my field of expertise.
Wow. That's a really great answer. Something that you said, especially, it relates to me too, and probably a lot of my peers is, of course, in any endeavor that you go down, the critical thinking skills and kind of where you want to be. So you using that, and it kind of gives me motivation to go farther into this. Um, so now we're gonna go to one of my questions that I had for myself and my peers. So from your experience, what are some of the best ways to get students and young people engaged?
I think the biggest thing that I tell people now in my current role, working with campus administrators, faculty, presidents, community stakeholders, is to not give up. It's not apathy that stops young people from wanting to actively engage, it's feeling like you're not being heard. And so making sure we're meeting people where they are in any exploration or process that they're going through, understanding that their ideas are valid and that together we can collectively make change and impact. When we become so short-sighted to think that we know more than the generations that will come after us, is where we start to lose kind of our niche in community, like what brings people together. And so I'd say that's something for young people to really think about is how they can engage and think cross-generationally. How do we engage and make impact?
Wow, cross-generationally, that's another thing that I often think about, as a first generation student and also for my future and my family, the community. That's amazing. Okay. So next question I have is, what role do colleges and universities play in fostering lifelong civic habits?
Yeah, I think that's my whole job. I think colleges and universities have a distinct role in making sure that we're preparing young people, again, not just for the hard skill in which they're achieving their degree within, but how do we think about the ways that young people can understand systems thinking and apply that to community engagement and learning, right? Like if you
Mm,
study so much about government, but don't actually work or experience government, then you
mm,
kind of miss the message on how this all operates. We can
that's
read a
true.
textbook definition of the three branches of government and how they all have a checks and balances and they work together. But until you take that entry level job and see how government operates day to day, like we
Yeah.
miss the mark entirely. And to know that government serves stakeholders, right? So you have to be in community. You have to listen to people. It can't just be what you think is the appropriate response, which it ultimately could be, but it could also be the like, how do I understand who the stakeholders are or the constituents of, as an example, my district or my neighborhood or my school community, that I really want to empower multiple voices. So we're making a decision that's representative, but understanding the mechanics and functionality of the systems in which we're currently set upon.
Wow. Okay. Systems that are set upon. Okay. All these answers are so like, well, eye-opening for me. So I'm actually taking notes a little bit too, just to, you know, thank you so much. Something that I've noticed is there are misconceptions of civic engagement. What are some common misconceptions that students have about civic engagement that you encounter?
That's an interesting question. And part of it, I kind of want to put back to you. Like, what do you think the misconceptions are as a student perspective?
I think in my personal experience before I was given the opportunity to be part of Empire of Corps OCCE, um, Obviously, when we're talking about civic engagement, and voting system, as I saw on your bio, very outreaches, I kind of associated with like politics, which it is a little bit, but my kind of thinking was like black and white, like all politics, I want to only be involved in politics. But further researching how it affects my community and fellow students' community, I was kind of interested, and my curiosity led me to, seeking out knowledge and understanding what it is. So that's my insight.
No, that's helpful. And I think it aligns with a lot of people's systems thinking there or individual thinking, right? Sometimes I think we get very short sighted about what the umbrella of civic engagement and civic participation can mean. And to understand that is sometimes cumbersome. Sometimes there's a lot of jargon, which makes it difficult for folks to engage in the process. Or sometimes it gets limited in the like civic engagement must mean voting. Civic engagement must mean politics, donkeys and elephants or red and blue, Republican, Democrat. Like it has to be so narrow. But really, it's about the betterment of the larger community and quality of life. And so, how do we think about civics and civic engagement in particular from an institutional lens to say it's about connecting issues that we care about? So, I always think of it as like, if you really care about food security, right? Like you want to make sure that most people in your community have access to healthy food options that aren't going to have an economic downturn, right? Like they can afford good food. But if you care about that, and then your campus sets up a campus food pantry, which is great and wonderful and serves a need, which is helpful. The hard part is if we don't connect that to the broader picture of civic engagement, you're always going to need that food pantry. You're always going to need volunteers to give their Saturdays to stock shelves. You're always going to need community stakeholders to donate non-perishable items and other goods that households needs. But if you
Mm,
take a further step back, you can say, well, what's happening there? Like, do we need to talk about civic engagement in a way to say we need a cost of living increase? So does the minimum wage need to change so that more people can afford quality foods? Are we looking at food deserts where people don't have access to healthy quality foods because there's a system breakdown or a lack of market share about the vendors that are available in that area to distribute food to communities? Are we
mm,
having politicians that aren't thinking about the tax breaks for individuals and how households can afford certain things, right? And so when you look at the issue and then you start to parse out the responsibilities to fix or change the issue, it's a lot more than just the band-aid solution of like, oh, my campus will set up a food pantry. And again, that food pantry is so needed and so thoughtful and so well intended and necessary. But there's so many other variables about how we can engage. And we look at that bigger picture of civic engagement, it gives us more of a holistic understanding that you and I as individuals, while it might seem like such a micro change that we're making, collectively when we work together, we might impact the ability in this example for communities and households to have access to foods that are nutritious and healthy that allow them to go on to do other things. And there's lots of food studies, which I'm not even going to get into or pretend that's my expertise on. Like, if you have healthy foods, it allows you to have like a higher matriculation in graduation rates or a higher success rate in whatever microchemistry you're studying, right? There's lots of things that go into that, but it's really just about the basics and how do we break that down so everyday persons understand that they have a role.
wow. Okay. That's really cool. I'm trying to think about one of the things that you said. Um, see, as food pantry is important for our community, especially we have a food pantry at Farmingdale, but
Right.
and I think one of the things that you said was like not just looking at the symptomology of what we need, like a band-aid, but it's kind of seeing the inner working, like the root cause. And so now I'm going to be thinking about that, how I can help around. Um, so the next question I have is, so when we're thinking about long-term impact of civic engagement programs, how do you measure the success just beyond like voter turnout?
That again, you're asking so many great questions today. So for us, if I take a step back and share, I work at a program called the All in Campus Democracy Challenge. We were founded in 2016 with the impetus of helping colleges and universities do just that. How do you institutionalize nonpartisan civic learning so that you're not just gearing up for the current election moment, which would be the comparison of student voting rates, as you just alluded
Mm,
to, but get you thinking about year round, regardless of the election season that you're in, how are you providing opportunities for civic learning, student voter participation, and overall engagement in everyday democracy, right? And so for us, yes, you can do a comparison of how many of your students are eligible to register, how many chose to do so, how many chose to turn out, and what's that fluctuation between years. There's also the impact on what does culture look like at your campus, which is really hard to measure. But there are things to say, do folks at Farmingdale understand that as a student here, I'm going to care about community? I know that I'm going to have information available to me about voting. I know I'm going to have information available to me about volunteer opportunities. I know I'm going to receive an education that allows me to be competitive on the job market, right? Like there's these other pieces of systems engagement that we have to make sure we're measuring that isn't always a like percentage on like a data set. But there is a metric of success. How many of your students are graduating? How many of your students attain jobs shortly after graduation into the career force, right? Like there are variables of success that then you can measure and track back to like how many community engagement efforts do you have. There's also the like how many service learning hours are provided to students. Again, how many volunteer hours are completed by students? How many peer-to-peer engagement hours happen? And how does that contribute to the overall ecosystem of the institution? And so those lots of ways that you can think about measuring student success and as it correlates to civic engagement. That doesn't have to be subjective necessarily to just voting participation rates.
Wow, that's such a succinct answer. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, next question that I have, how do you know if students are leaving the college seeing themselves as change makers? I'm curious what lasting impressions and skills institutions aim to instill to empower students to create that positive change.
Yeah, I feel like a really big key indicator there is a sense of belonging. Do students that graduate from an institution feel connected to that institution and that community? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stay there for the next like 20 years of their life and set down roots, but do they feel a lasting impact and a kinship towards the institution and their peers as they set off into the next phase of their, adulthood lives, however you want to define that there. I think there's also the idea of like if you're teaching students, again, the mapping of skills that we talked about early on, which correlate with things that the NACE and Gallup and others for best colleges for career readiness start to map out around critical thinking and collaboration and teamwork that allows people to be employable. I think you're also looking at those big impacts that institutions can have. Like, where are we offering opportunities for students to gain those skills and again feel a sense of belonging to the institution, which looks different for everyone. So it's really hard to say, Farmingdale's doing it this way and Oswego's doing it this way, and which one's going to be better. It's really individualized about the campus community and making sure there's some reciprocity between the student, the faculty, the staff, the senior leadership, and the greater community to better understand what does it mean to have a sense of belonging there and it not be thrusted upon you of like you're just going to do these things as a student to like kind of fit in. Like you need to be able to be you and to feel celebrated by being you, and it's the institution's role to create that environment.
Wow, thank you so much. Um, One of the bonus questions had on my mind was looking ahead. What are emerging challenges or opportunities do you see in civic engagement, in the civic engagement landscape?
Yeah. So one of the things that our organization does is we map which ways students are able to participate in elections at all levels, so state, local, and federal elections. And one of the challenges that we notice is that there's a lack of ready information for how rapidly policy changes, which impact the ability for young people in particular to engage in elections, which is one way to have civic participation. So, as an example, one of the limitations that we're watching most closely is that when there's a change as i.e., voter ID regulations, which every state has a different voter ID requirement. And then when states make a change on those quickly, it's hard for young people who might have their college ID as their first ID no longer be able to use that to vote. And so for us to be able to get that information as quickly as possible to the campus administrators so they understand which IDs are qualifiable per elections or per state law, so that way their students can participate. And so again, when policy moves too quickly and we don't have enough time to get the appropriate information to campus administrators who then give the information to students, that's a change that we're constantly monitoring. One, because we know that administrators have a lot on their plate, same with faculty and same with senior leadership as they're trying to help students navigate the collegiate process. So we want to make sure that we're creating capacity for them to still be there for their students while also managing the policy changes that happen around them. And to make it even more complicated, because college students have a choice if they vote at their campus address or their home address is where they define residency for them, to ask a campus administrator to know all, again, voter ID laws as the example here, all 50 states plus the district's voter ID regulations, and the impacting change that happens when legislation happens at different times in different states and in different ways. It's just something that we're very cognizant of like, what does that workload look like? And how do we get that information to you? And again, not trying to tell people who are what to vote for, but just in the nonpartisan ways of which we all want to engage in our communities. Like, how do we make sure information can be readily available, easily digestible, and enacted? So that's a challenge that we're constantly monitoring.
Okay, definitely keep that in mind next time I speak to any students or just going on my civic journey. So one of the last questions here, how can a student like me, who are just starting out, play a role in shaping the future of democracy, as I know you're all in democracy? I'm kind of asking this because I want to know what actionable steps I can take in the now, so I can make meaningful difference.
Yeah. I'd say the first thing you can do is if you're eligible to do so, make sure you're registered to vote. And again, because you have that choice as a college student, if you choose to vote in your home state or your campus address, you have that choice. So make that choice available to you. Whether you are eligible to participate in elections or not, make sure that you talk to your peers about the voting process. There's local and state elections happening all the time. So don't be cognizant of just participating in the midterms or the general election, but just stay as informed as you're possibly able to do. I think the third thing I would encourage you to do is to make sure you know who your representatives are, whether you, again, are an eligible citizen to engage in the voting process, like know who represents you. What do they stand for? What issues do they align with you on, and what issues do you differ on? And how can you make your voice heard? So I think those three things are simple steps that folks can take to, one, make sure you're prepared to engage, two, that your peers are thinking about the process, and three, that you know who represents you in government, so that way you can make meaningful connections. I think other kind of surface level things you can do, think about volunteering. Where do you spend your time? Think about where you spend your money. Think about, as you enter into the career force, and if you're able to do so, like, where do you want to donate dollars to organizations that you care about? Like, there's lots of small choices you can make that I think better the community around you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, those are all my questions for today, but thank you again, Stephanie. I really appreciate you sharing your time, experience, and advice with me today. Hearing about your journey and the work that you've done in the all-in NASPA, as you've said, even locally as an election clerk, really gives me a clearer sense of how broad and impactful civic engagement can be. So for me, it's really inspiring to see how someone with your background, starting with psychology and biology, and now you're shaping national civic engagement efforts. So it's made much of a difference. I'm still finding my way on the journey, and I hope we can stay in touch. I'd love to keep learning from you as I continue on my journey. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and also our student, Himal, for this wonderful conversation. I think it will be so beneficial to our students, our staff, also in our faculty as we continue to implement new initiatives and programs regarding civic and community engagement at Farmingdale State College. So thank you once again, Stephanie, for all the work that you're doing across the nation in this field.